Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. And I'm Jen, and today's going to be a true crime video. And I apologize that we didn't do one last week. I had some things come up and I needed to take care of. So, we are going to talk about Peter Sutcliffe. And we're going to, this is from England, and this occurred in England. He was an English serial killer who was dubbed the Yorkshire Ripper. And the way it sounds is that he was trying to be like Jack the Ripper. So we're going to start. But before we do, those of you that are new, welcome. If you are new, please, hit the subscribe button, and then those of you that aren't new, welcome back. So on May 22nd of 1981, he was found guilty of murdering 13 women and attempting to murder 7 others between 1975 and 1980. And he was sentenced to 20 concurrent sentences of life imprisonment, which were then converted to a whole life order in 2010. So he was. So what he did was he initially attacked women and girls in residential areas, but he then moved on to red light districts because he was attracted to the vulnerability of, prostitutes, so forth. He had allegedly regularly used the services of prostitutes in Leeds and Bradford. And then after his arrest by the South Yorkshire police for driving with false number plates in January of 1981, he was then transferred to West Yorkshire police, who questioned him about the killings. And he confessed to being the murderer, saying that the voice of God had sent him on a mission to kill prostitutes. Okay, then. Okay. I know we hear a lot about that, but that just kind of, I don't know. Now, when he went to trial, he pled not guilty to murder on grounds of diminished responsibility. In other words, he pleaded to being, I guess, insane. But he was convicted of murder. Following his conviction, he began using his mother's maiden name of Coonan. And his was one of the largest and most expensive manhunts in British history. And the police were criticized for their failure to catch him, despite he having been interviewed 9 times in the course of their investigation that went on for 5 years. And because of the nature of the case, the police handled an exceptional amount of information, some of it misleading, and there was a hoax that was involved, recorded messages, and following his, the hoax being that there was somebody else supposedly doing this, and he was going by the name Wareside Jack. And following his conviction, the government ordered a review of the investigation. The findings were made fully public in 2006 and confirmed the validity of the criticism of the police force. The report led to changes to investigative procedures, which were adopted in 2019. Then he was transferred from prison to Broadmoor Hospital in 1984 after being diagnosed with being paranoid schizophrenia. The High Court then dismissed an appeal from him in 2010 confirming that he would serve the whole life sentence and never be released from custody. And then in August of 2016, it was ruled that he was mentally fit to be returned to prison, and he was transferred that month to prison. Then he died in a hospital on November the 13th of 2024 after being diagnosed with COVID-19. So now we're going to get into him, period. He was born to a working class family in Yorkshire. He was raised Catholic. His parents were John William Sutcliffe, and his mother was Catherine Francis. He was a loner. He left school at age 15, had a series of menial jobs, including 2 stints as a grave digger. Then in 1971 to 1973, he worked at the Bayard television factory on a packaging line. He left his position when he was asked to go on the road as a salesman. Then he left Bayard television. He started working night shifts at the Britannia Works of Anderton International, and from 1973 to 1975. He took redundancy and used half of the 400-pound payoff to train as a heavy goods vehicle driver. In other words, basically, what a truck driver does here. On March 5th of 1976, he was dismissed for the theft of used tires. He was employed until 1976, when he found a job as a truck driver for a holding company in Bradford. Sutcliffe there were reports that he hired prostitutes as a young man, and it has been speculated that he had a bad experience during which he was conned money by a prostitute and her pimp. Other analysis of his actions have not found that he sought the services of these prostitutes, but note that he nonetheless developed an obsession with them, including watching them solicit on the streets and so forth. In 1967, in February, he met Sonia Sersma. They married on August the 10th of 1974. She had suffered several miscarriages, and they were informed that they wouldn't be able to have children, and she resumed a teaching training course, during which she had an affair with an ice cream van driver. Now they don't know if that was true or not. When Sonia completed the course, she began teaching, and she and Sutcliffe used her salary to buy a house in Bradford, in which they moved in on September the 26th of 1977, where they were living when Sutcliffe was arrested. His childhood and his early adolescence, he showed no signs of abnormality. He was one of but one of his brothers had admitted that their father was an abusive alcoholic, stating that the father once smashed a beer glass over Peter's head for sitting in his chair at the Christmas table after arguing with his brother when he was 4 or 5. Their father would whip them with a belt. Later, in part related to his occupation as a grave digger, he developed a macro-based sense of humor, and in his late adolescence, he developed a growing obsession with voyeurism and spent much time spying on prostitutes and the men seeking their services. I'm sorry. That's just freaky. Maybe it's me. I don't know, but that's just kind of freaky weird. Okay. Now, we're going to get into the attacks and the murders. Leeds was the hot spot for Ripper activity. Now, remember, he's already started doing all this stuff and so forth. Okay, so there were 6 murders, 4 attacks that happened in the city. His first and last murders also occurred in Leeds. His known victims, and there were 13 of them, were Wilma Mccann, Emily Jackson, Wilma Mccann, she died in 1975, Emily Jackson, 1976, Irene Richardson, 1977, Patricia Tina Atkinson, she was killed in Bradford in 1977, Jane MacDonald in Leeds, 1977, Jane Jordan in Manchester in 1977, Yvonne Pearson of Bradford in 1978, Helen Reitka, Huddersfield, 1978, Vera Millward, Manchester in 1978, Josephine Whitaker in Halifax of 1979, Barbara Leach of Bradford, 1979, Marguerite Walls, Leeds, 1980, and Jacqueline Hill, Leeds, 1980. And now he is also known to have attacked 10 other women. There was a woman of an unknown name, Bradford of 1969. Now these are the women that he attacked. He didn't kill. Anna, now I'm going to probably butcher this last name, Rogluski, Kaylee, 1975, Olive Smelt in Halifax of 1975, Tracy Brown, Silsden in 1975, Marcella Claxton, Leeds, 1976, Maureen Long, Bradford of 1977, Marilyn Moore, Leeds, 1977, Anne Rooney in Leeds of 1979, Yapada Bandera, Leeds of 1980, Teresa Sykes, Huddersfield, 1980. Now, at the time, Claxton was 4 months pregnant when she was attacked. And as a result of this attack, she lost her baby. Now, this is his first documented assault, which occurred in 1969. Was a female prostitute whom he had met while searching for another woman who had tricked him out of money. He had left his friend's van, walked up to St. Paul's Road in Bradford until he was out of sight. When he returned, he was out of breath as if he had been running. He told Birdsall to drive quickly, and Sutcliffe said he had followed a prostitute into a garage and hit her over the head with a stone in a sock. And according to his statement, Sutcliffe said, "I got out of the car, went across the road, and hit her. The force of the impact tore the toe off the sock, and whatever was in it came out. I went back to the car and got in." So as you can tell, he really doesn't seem to have any kind of remorse, guilt, anything for what he's done. I mean, it's just like he just doesn't give a crap. The police then visited his home, as the woman he had attacked had noted Birdsall vehicle registration plate, and he admitted that he had hit her, but claimed it was with his hand. The police told him he was very lucky, as the woman didn't want anything more to do with the incident, even though she was a known prostitute and her husband was in jail. In 1975, he committed his second assault. So he went 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, almost 6 years before he did anything. He committed his second assault on the night of July 5th, 1975 in Keighley, where he attacked Anna Rogluski, who was walking alone, striking her unconscious with a ball-peen hammer and slashing her stomach with a knife. Disturbed by a neighbor, he left without killing her. She survived after neurological surgery, but was psychologically traumatized by the attack. She said later, and I quote, "I've been afraid to go out much because I feel people are staring and pointing at me. The whole thing is making my life a misery. I sometimes wish I had died in the attack." Then, on the night of August the 15th, he attacks Olivia Smelt in Halifax, employing the same, motive. He briefly engaged Smelt with a commonplace pleasantry about the weather before he struck her with a hammer from behind to her skull. He then disarranged her clothing and slashed her lower back with a knife. Again, he was interrupted and left his victim badly injured but alive. She did also suffer severe emotional and mental trauma. She had told interviewing officers that her attacker had a Yorkshire accent, but of course this information was ignored as neither she nor Roglushki were in towns with a red light area. So basically they just didn't really, I don't know if that's considered, a technicality, but they just didn't follow up on that. On August the 26th, he then attacked 14-year-old Tracy Brown in Silsden. Of course, now he struck her from behind, but this time he hit her on the head 5 times while she was walking along a country road. He ran off when he saw the lights of a passing car, leaving his victim to require having to get brain surgery. He was not convicted of the attack, but confessed to it in 1992. Now, the first victim that was killed by Peter Sutcliffe was Wilma Mccann on October 30th. Mccann, from Scott Hall in Leeds, she was a mother of 4, and the children were between ages 2 and 7. He struck her in the back of the skull twice with a hammer, and then inflicted a stab wound to the throat, 2 stab wounds below the right breast, 3 stab wounds below the right breast, and a series of 9 stab wounds around the umbilicus. An intensive inquiry involving 150 officers of the Yorkshire Police and 11,000 interviews they just failed to find the culprit. Then in 2007, Wilma's eldest daughter died by suicide after suffering years of anguish and depression over the circumstances and consequences of her mother's death upon her and her siblings. Then in 1976, he committed his next murder in Leeds. Now see, he's waiting. I don't know if he just does this every year. It doesn't really, it doesn't say, but it seems to me like he waited. 1975 when he, did all the attacks and then killed his first victim. Now he goes to his next one, and he stabs 42-year-old Emily Jackson 52 times. In dire financial straits, Jackson had been persuaded by her husband to engage in prostitution, utilizing the van of their family roofing business. Sutcliffe picked up Jackson, who was soliciting, then drove a half a mile from the pub where they were to some derelict buildings. He then hit her on the head with a hammer, dragged her body into a rubbish-strewn yard, then used a sharpened screwdriver to stab her in the neck, chest, and abdomen. He stamped on her thigh, leaving behind an impression of his boot. Now, as to why they didn't figure, I don't know. Then he attacked 20-year-old Marcella Claxton on May 9th. Walking home from a party, she had accepted an offer of a lift from Sutcliffe. When she got out of the car to go use the restroom, he hit her from behind with the hammer. She survived and testified against him. At the time of his attack, she had been 4 months pregnant and miscarried her baby. She required multiple extensive brain operations and suffered from intermittent blackouts and depression. Now, 1977. Now, mind you, you can see he waits a whole year. It's like he does so many a year. I don't know if that's, in his mind, okay, I don't want to get caught, or, what I mean. So now in February of 1977, he attacks Irene Richardson, a Chapeltown prostitute. Richardson was bludgeoned to death with a hammer, and once she was dead, he mutilated her corpse with a knife. Tire tracks left near the murder scene resulted in a long list of possible suspects' vehicles. Then 2 months later, on April 23rd, he kills Patricia Tina Atkinson, a prostitute from Bradford, in her flat, where police found a boot print on the bedclothes. Another 2 months later, on the 26th of June, he murdered 16-year-old Jane McDonald. She was not a prostitute. And in the public perception, her murder showed that all women were potential victims. The police described her as the first innocent victim. He seriously assaulted Maureen Long in Bradford in July. He was interrupted and fled, leaving her for dead. She suffered from hypothermia when she was found and was in the hospital for 9 weeks. A witness misidentified the make of his car, which resulted in 300 police officers checking thousands of cars. Then in 1977, in October, he murders Jean Jordan, a prostitute from Manchester. In a confession, he said he realized the new £5 note he had given her was traceable. Now, okay. After hosting a family party at his new home, he returned to the wasteland behind Manchester's cemetery, where he had left the body, to retrieve the note. Unable to find it, he mutilated Jordan's corpse and moved on. On October the 9th, Jordan's body was discovered by a local dairy worker and future actor Bruce Jones, who had an allotment of land that adjoined the site where her body was found, and was searching for house bricks when he made the discovery. The £5 note was hidden in a secret compartment in her handbag and was traced to the Midland Bank. Police analysis of the bank operations allowed them to narrow their field of inquiry to 8,000 employees who could have received it in their wage packet. For the next 3 months, the police interviewed 5,000 men, including Sutcliffe, and they found that the alibi given for Sutcliffe's whereabouts was credible. He had spent much of the evening of the killing at a family party. Weeks of intensive investigations pertaining to the origin of the £5 note led them to nothing, leaving police, frustrated that they had collected an important clue but had been unable to trace where it came from or where it had been, to whom it had been issued. Then on December of 1974, Sutcliffe attacks Marilyn Moore, another prostitute. She survived and provided police with a description of her attacker. There were tire tracks found at the scene that matched those from an earlier attack. Her photo bitch bore a strong resemblance to Sutcliffe. Like other survivors, she had provided a good description of his car, which had been seen in the red light districts. He had been excuse me, he had been interviewed on this issue. Now, as to whether or not he had been, as to whether or not, they considered him a suspect, no, they didn't really, it doesn't really tell you. Then in 1978, they had discontinued the search for the person who had received the £5 note. Sutcliffe was interviewed about it. He was not investigated further. He was contacted and disregarded by the Ripper Squad, and on several further occasions. That month, he killed again. His victim was Yvonne Pearson. She was 21 years old and a prostitute from Bradford. He repeatedly bludgeoned her about the head with a ball-peen hammer, then jumped on her chest before stuffing horsehair into her mouth from a discarded sofa under which he hid her body. Then 10 days later, he kills 18-year-old Helen Reitka, and she was also a prostitute. He struck her on the head 5 times as she exited his vehicle before stripping most of her clothes, although her bra and polo neck jumper were positioned above her breast, and he repeatedly stabbed her in the chest. Her body was found 3 days later beneath railway arches in a timber yard to which he had driven her. Sutcliffe had said of Reitka while in police custody, "I had the urge to kill any woman. The urge inside me to kill girls was now practically uncontrollable." Then, in May, he kills Vera Millward in an attack in the car park of a hospital. Now, in 1979, which now I'm going to stop there. I think it's just kind of like I've said this over the course of this. I think it's just kind of strange. I don't know. Maybe it's me. But he waits a year before he does these killings. You know what I mean? He goes 1 year, kills somebody, then he stops, and then the following year he does the same thing over and over again. It just, I don't understand. Then in 1979, he kills Josephine Whitaker, a 19-year-old building society clerk whom he had attacked in Halifax while she was walking home. Despite forensic evidence, police efforts were diverted for several months following the receipt of a taped message purporting to be from the murderer, and the murderer was taunting the assistant chief constable who was leading the investigation. The tape contained a man's voice saying, and I quote, "I'm Jack. I see you're having no luck catching me. I have the greatest respect for you, but Lord, you are no nearer catching me now than 4 years ago when I started." So now, based on that recorded message, they begin searching for a man with a wareside accident, which linguists narrowed down to Castleton area. The hoaxer, dubbed Wareside Jack, sent 2 letters to the police. Then in March 1978, he boasted of his crimes, and the letters were signed Jack the Ripper, and he claimed responsibility for the murder of 26-year-old Joan Harrison in Preston in 1975. At the time, the police mistakenly believed that the Preston murder was not public knowledge. So basically, they kind of screwed up in their own way. Now, the hoaxer case was then again opened in 2005. There was DNA taken from the envelope and was entered into the database, which matched to a John Samuel Humble, which he was unemployed. October in 2005, he was charged with attempting to pervert the course of justice for sending the hoax letters and the tape. He was then remanded in custody, and on March 21st of 2006, and was convicted and sentenced to 8 years in prison. He died on the 30th of July of 2019. On September the 1st, now it doesn't give me the year of when this happened. On September the 1st, Sutcliffe murdered 20-year-old Barbara Leach. She was a Bradford University student. Her body was dumped at the rear of 13 Ash Grove under a pile of bricks close to the university. It was his 16th attack. The murder of a woman who was not a prostitute again prompted an expensive publicity campaign emphasizing the Wareside connection. Despite this lead and it being false, he was interviewed on at least 2 other occasions on 1979. Despite matching several forensic clues and being on the list of 300 names that were in connection to the £5 note, he was not suspected, and he was interviewed by the police 9 times in total. So now in 1980, he was arrested for drunk driving. While awaiting trial, he killed 2 more women. 47-year-old Marguerite Walls on the night of August the 20th of 1980. Then 20-year-old Jacqueline Hill, a student, on the night of November the 17th of 1980. Hill's body was found near Arndale Center. He also attacked 3 other women who survived. One was Apija Bandera, and she was in Leeds. The Maureen Lee, and she was attacked on the grounds of Leeds University in October. Then 16-year-old Teresa Sykes, she was attacked in Huddersfield. She, needing to feel safe, she placed a wardrobe and a dressing table against her bedroom door, and she slept with a knife hidden under her pillow. Then, on November the 25th of 1980, Trevor Birdsall, an associate of Sutcliffe's, and the getaway car, fled his first documented assault in 1969. He reported him to the police as a suspect, but the information vanished into the paperwork that had already been accumulated. So you got somebody that comes in and knew him because he, was associated with this person, and they lose. Okay. So now on January the 2nd of 1981, he was stopped by the police with a prostitute, 24-year-old Olivia Rivers, in the driveway of the Light Trades house in Melbourne Avenue. They checked by probationary counsel Robert Hydes revealed that his car had false number plates, and he was arrested and transferred to Dewsbury. At Dewsbury, he was questioned in relation to the Yorkshire Ripper case, as he matched many of the physical characteristics. The next day, the police returned to the scene and discovered a knife, hammer, and a robe he had discarded when he briefly slipped away from the police after telling them that he needed to use the bathroom. He hid a second knife in the toilet at the police station when he was permitted to use the toilet. The police obtained a search warrant for his home and brought his wife in for questioning. When he was stripped at the police station, he was wearing an inverted V-neck sweater under his trousers. The sleeves had been pulled over his legs, and the V-neck exposed his... Okay. I'm giving you a heads up. This is kind of a little explicit here. Exposed his genital area. The fronts of the elbows were padded to protect his knees, as presumably he had knelt over his victims' corpses. The sexual implications of the outfit were considered obvious, but it was not made public until 2003 in a book that was written by Michael Bilton, Wicked Beyond Belief, The Hunt for the Yorkshire Ripper. And after 2 days of intensive questioning, he, on January the 4th of 1981, he suddenly declared he was the Ripper. He calmly described his many attacks. Weeks later, he had claimed that God had told him to murder the women. The women I killed were filth, he told the police. Bastard prostitutes who were littering the streets. I was just cleaning it up. He displayed regret only when talking of his youngest victim, Jane McDonald. When he questioned about the killing of Joan Harrison, he vehemently denied responsibility. Her murder had been linked to the Ripper killings by the Wareside Jack clan. But they did find out in 2011, DNA evidence revealed that the crime had actually been committed by a convicted sex offender, Christopher Smith. He was Sutcliffe was charged on January the 5th of 1981. At his trial, he pled not guilty to 13 charges of murder. The basis was that he claimed to be the tool of God's will. He said that he had heard voices that ordered him to kill prostitutes while working as a gravedigger, which he claimed originated from the headstone of a Polish man, and that the voices were that of God. He pleaded guilty to 7 charges of attempted murder. The prosecution intended to accept his plea after 4 psychiatrists diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. But the judge demanded an unusually detailed explanation of the prosecution's reasoning. And after a 2-hour representation and a 90-minute lunch break and another 40 minutes of legal discussion, the judge rejected the diminished responsibility plea, insisting that the case should be dealt with by a jury. The trial was set on May 5th of 1981. Then the trial lasted for 2 weeks, and despite the efforts of his counsel, Sutcliffe was found guilty on all counts and was sentenced to 20 concurrent life sentences. The jury rejected the evidence of 4 psychiatrists that stated that Sutcliffe was paranoid schizophrenia and possibly influenced by the evidence of a prison officer who heard him say that to his wife that he had convinced people he was mad, then he might get 10 years in a loony bin. So I really don't think he was, crazy, but then again, you don't know. Now, the judge said that Sutcliffe was beyond redemption and hoped that he would never leave prison. He was recommended a minimum term of 30 years to be served before parole, meaning that he would be unlikely to be freed until 2011. Then, on July 16th of 2010, the High Court issued Sutcliffe with a whole life tariff, meaning he was never to be released. And after his trial, he admitted to 2 other attacks. It was decided that these offenses was not going to be in the public interest, and the police made it clear that the victims wished to remain anonymous. Now, in all of this investigation, there was some criticism of law enforcement. They were criticized for being inadequately prepared for an investigation on this massive scale. Now, mind you, it was one of the largest investigations by British police and predated the use of computers. So information that the suspects were stored on handwritten index cards. Aside from difficulties in storing and accessing the paperwork, it was difficult for our officers to overcome the information overload. And Sutcliffe was interviewed 9 times, but all the information that the police had about the case was stored in paper form, which made the cross-referencing difficult. Then compounded by television appeals for information, it generated thousands of documents. There was a report in 1982 called the Byford Report, and it says, and I quote, "The ineffectiveness of the major incident room was a serious handicap to the Ripper investigation. While it should have been the effective nerve center of the whole police operation, the backlog of unprocessed information resulted in the failure to connect vital pieces. This serious fault in the central index system allowed Peter Sutcliffe to continually slip through the net." So, as you can see, there was just a lot of a lot of, I guess, mistakes, which I can understand, because you got to realize, like it says, this was before you had computers, and where you could put all this stuff on a computer and cross-reference it. So I get it, but still, let's see. Now, when I tell you about the Byford Report, this was an official inquiry into the Ripper case, and it was not released until June of 2006. There's, it's just a lot of different things stating what happened and what wasn't done and what should have been done. Here, there's a quote from the Byford Report. "We feel it is highly improbable that the crimes in respect of which Sutcliffe has been charged and convicted are the only ones attributable to him. This feeling is reinforced by examining the details of a number of assaults on women since 1969, which in some ways clearly fall into the established pattern of Peter Sutcliffe. I hasten to add that I feel sure that the senior police officers in the areas concerned are also mindful of this possibility, but in order to ensure full account is taken of all the information available, I have arranged for an effective liaison to take place." So, as you can see, they did try to question him, and now they do have an anonymous letter that Trevor Birdsall, which, as you can remember, he knew Peter Sutcliffe in 1966, and he was the one that was with him when it says, "I have good reason to know the man you are looking for in the Ripper case. This man has dealings with prostitutes and has always had a thing about them. His name and address is Peter Sutcliffe, Garden Lane, Heaton, Bradford, whatever." This letter, now mind you, this letter was marked priority number 1. There was an index card that was created, and then, of course, it ended up in a filing tray and so forth. And it just goes through all this of what happened, why, another one said, the other quote from the Byford Report is, "The failure to take advantage of Birdsall's anonymous letter and his visit to the police station was yet again a stark illustration of the progressive decline in the overall efficiency of the major incident room. It resulted in Sutcliffe being at liberty for more than a month when he might conceivably have been in custody. Thankfully, there is no reason to think he committed any further murderous assaults within that period. So now, as you all know, he's already in custody. He started his sentence in May of 1981, and then he was assaulted by a career criminal, and then of 1983, he followed Sutcliffe into, Sutcliffe required 30 stitches. Then, 1996, he was attacked by another inmate. Then Sutcliffe's father died in 2004, and then in 2005 he was allowed to visit where his father's ashes had been scattered. Then on 2007 he was again attacked by another inmate, and of course, this is the quote that the guy that attacked him, and this is his quote. This is what he said to Sutcliffe: "You fucking raping, murdering bastard. I will blind your fucking other one." And then in 2009, no, I'm sorry. Now, he did file an appeal in 2010. It's 10. Now, there aren't anything, there's really not a whole lot about him after that. Then, 2016, there was a medical tribunal that ruled that he was no longer required for clinical treatment for his mental condition. Then in 2017, the West Yorkshire Police launched Operation Paint Hawk, and this was to determine if Sutler was guilty of unsolved crimes that dated back to 1964. Which I don't think they really found any kind of they never really found any kind of evidence to prove that. Then in 2020, he died at the age of 74 after having previously returned to follow treatment for a suspected heart attack. He had a number of health problems, including diabetes, and he had refused treatment for COVID-19. Why? I don't know. But there was a funeral, and his body was cremated. I just know that this guy was a real piece of work. There's a mini series that is on BBC, but I don't think it's now there is one December of 2020. Netflix released the 4-part documentary entitled "The Ripper," which I have not watched. I have that in my thing to watch. So, but that's really it, guys. That is all of the that's it, and that is all of it. This man was a piece of work. All I got to say. But anyway, thank you guys for listening, and that will end this video. And I hope everyone has a great week, and I will see you all next time.